Բարև ձեզ, ինչպես տեղյակ եք, այսօր տեղի ունեցել Կենտրոնական բանկի խորհրդի նիստը, որտեղ որոշվել է վերաֆինանսավորման տոկոսադրույքը թողնել ամփոփող 10.75% մակարդակում։ Կենտրոնական բանկի նախագահը կներկայացնի մեր մամուլի հաղորդակցությունը, որից հետո սիրով ընդունենք ձեր հարցերը։
Ուրեմն ինչպես նշվեց 2023 թվականի հունվարի 31-ի նիստում Կենտրոնական բանկի խորհուրդը որոշեց վերաֆինանսավորման տոկոսադրույքը թողնել ամփոփող, սահմանելով 10.75% վրա։ 2022 թվականի դեկտեմբերին 12 ամսյա գնաճը շարունակել է նվազել եւ տարեվերջին կազմել 8.3%, 12 ամսյա բնականon գնաճը եւս նվազել է, կազմելով 9.5%։ 2022 թվականի վերջին համաշխարհային եւ Հայաստանի Հանրապետության հիմնական գործընկեր երկրների տնտեսական ակտիվության դանդաղումը շարունակվել է։ Համաշխարհային գնաճը եւս նվազում է, պայմանավորված որոշ հումքային եւ պարենային ապրանքների գների նվազմամբ։ Այնուամենայնիվ, հարաբերական ընդայնված պահանջարկը նպաստում է գնաճային միջավայրի պահպանմանը։ Ուստի զարգացած երկրների կենտրոնական բանկերն առաջիկայում դեռևս կշարունակեն խստացնել դրամավարկային պայմանները, եւ միջազգային Արդյունքում համաշխարհային տնտեսությունից Հայաստանի Հանրապետության տնտեսության վրա ակնկալում ենք գնաճային ազդեցությունների թուլացում։ 2022 թվականի վերջին Հայաստանի տնտեսությունում բարձր ակտիվությունը պահպանվել է, որին շարունակել է նպաստել ծառայությունների ոլորտում ձևավորված արտաքին պահանջարկը։ Միաժամանակ պահպանվել են արտահանման եւ հնարժի ավելացման դրական նյութերը ծառայությունների եւ արդյունաբերության ճյուղերում։ Իրականացված զսպող դրամարկային քաղաքականության, դրամի արժևորման եւ արտաքին հատվածից գնաճային ազդեցության թուլացման արդյունքում Հայաստանի Հանրապետության ընդհանուր գնաճային միջավայրը աստիճանաբար մեղմվում է։ Այնուամենայնիվ, բարձր պահանջարկը դեռևս արտահայտվում է աշխատուժի շուկայում եւ նպաստում աշխատավարձերի եւ առանձին ապրանքների եւ ծառայությունների գների աճին։ Կենտրոնական բանկի խորհուրդը նպատակարար է գտնում ներկայումս քաղաքականության տոկոսադրույքը թողնել ամփոփող։ Խորհուրդը հետեւող
The board will be committed to ensuring inflation stabilization and prevent any risk of unanchoring of financial expectations. According to the outlined monetary policy scenario, the 12-month inflation will gradually decline. Starting from the end of 2023, will stabilize around the target of 4%. The board estimates that the risk of inflation deviating from the projected path are mainly balanced. Should the risk materialize in any direction, the board stands ready to respond accordingly to the fulfillment of the price stability objective. Thank you.
Armen Press, Anna Grigoryan.
Pardon Galstyan, I'm interested first and foremost, as of the beginning of the year, what's the projection of the increase of the growth of the GDP by the central bank? As of summarizing the last year, what have been the dynamics of lending and deposits, and what was the share of foreign citizens in it? And using this opportunity, one more question. The dram is appreciating, but on this background, the prices of the imported goods do not go down and are still rising. Do you see any need for interventions for at least the prices of imported goods to go down? Thank you.
The
question was three-pronged about the economic growth or projections. Let me get to the respective slide. That's the de facto. Our projection essentially remains the same as of last year's end. We think that through the year we'll have 4.6% economic growth, mostly determined by the services sector growth. As for deposits and lending indicators, through the year essentially lending increased. If we deduct the forex effect, it's 15%. The deposits grew approximately by 43%, of which the residents accounted for 29.4%, and non-resident deposit growth was 96.3%. So in absolute numbers, the deposits.
Մեր կողմից դիտարկվող ռեզիդենտների ավանդները ստոկը աշխարհային ցուցանիշը 2022 թվականի դեկտեմբերի 31-ին կազմել է 3 միլիարդ
was 3,370 million drams. That of residents, and for non-residents 1,287 million. The higher growth rate was in the deposits of non-residents. As for the other question you asked, whether
Կարող ենք փաստել, որ
prices for
մենք
goods are rising or falling. We could acknowledge that the commodity market inflationary pressures are contained. This is partially determined by the exchange rate and partially explained by the global market. So we have a FAO index behavior. If you look at the international commodity markets, the prices for oil, which last February peaked, the light blue curve currently are on a lower level compared to that, and naturally we observe that the Armenian food prices have to some extent decreased compared to those peak values. Thank you. Sputnik, Armenia. Following up with the same question, I do not expect you to go down to micro level, but imported food products display unhomogeneous dynamics in their prices. Some have increased more than the average. For example, condensed milk has increased by about 30%. Bakery, since the wheat and flour are important, it's 40% over the average. And there are some goods which conversely have decreased from the average or went down to the minus. This is not always correlating or more or less approximating the FAO index indicators. Let's say sugar in December year-on-year went down by 2%, whereas in Armenia it's about 5% of growth by FAO index. So has there been an analysis of these? What determines these discrepancies? Maybe there are groupings of goods aggregated. It would be difficult to quote micro-level numbers, but here's the macro situation. We should consider several important factors. The global commodity prices are essentially decreasing the FAO index, which is the average thereof is falling. There are some goods that have drastic decrease, like oils. There are some the volatility is less. Dairies, for example, circumstances, whichever component is reflecting the prices of imported goods goes down. What would be the developments around this? We believe that the monetary authorities will be implementing monetary policies, which we expect to be further tightened, will have its impact. This may be balanced off by the restoration of the Chinese economy. At this point, striking a balance and say which direction they will move would be hard to say. As for transportation, container indices increased threefold, fourfold, and these issues have been addressed and are continuing to be addressed. China let go of the zero-COVID policy. We assume that in the Chinese labor market, certain eventualities will mitigate the container transport issue further. So from that dimension, we were also expecting some positive signals. The third component that impacted last year's the food prices imported was the development of the exchange rate, which over a year appreciated a trend of depreciation. The sum of all of these impacts allows us to expect that the inflationary pressures that we had last year will be mitigated this year. Civilinet. Thank you, Mr. Galstyan. Two questions. Once about the forex. if you're not changing the rate, that allows us to expect that there would be much pressures on the exchange rate. In any case, appreciation or non-appreciation of drama, how will the exchange rate behave this year? Because lots of big amounts of funds are still continuing to enter Armenia. Will this trend sustain or not in your evaluation? And if you can answer the next question, there's been quite an accumulation of capital in the banking sector. Net profits exceed twofold, threefold last year's indicators. The means accumulated in banks are placed by the banks abroad. $1.6 billion, if I'm not mistaken. The bank's main toolkit that they inject cash in the economy is lending. Lending as of last year was 4.5%, which is quite low. Most of it was mortgages. So what can you say? Why do we have this situation? Why, from the perspective of injecting funds into the economy, it's such a controversy? Is it the problem with the banks who get easy returns and want to place them equally easily, or is it the problem with the economy that there is no absorption capacity and project funding or lending is sophisticated and lengthy process? Thank you. Let's start with the exchange rate. As you quite rightly mentioned, the factors that will impact the exchange rate this year are multiple and unpredictable. The main funds that have come into Armenia through visitors were determined by the certain geopolitical situation. Naturally, we have to keep monitoring the developments in the geopolitical domain, and ancillary to that, we will see influx or outflux of capital. Import-export dynamics will follow suit. And these are the fundamentals that will prompt us as to how the Forex will behave. Any projection at this point, especially of the exchange rate coming from the mouth of the Governor of the Central Bank, is not productive, so I'll refrain from any predictions. But the fundamentals that you mentioned are the ones that will continue to impact the developments of the exchange rate in 2023. As for international visitors depositing funds in the banks, and the banks, in our assessment, are reasonably not transforming this into lending products, but keep them, I apologize, to some extent they convert them to demand funding and pursue this policy. I think this is a reasonable strategy of risk management by the banks. You mentioned 4%, but of course there's an impact of the exchange rate. Net of Forex, it's been a 15% increase in the lending, mostly mortgages. Why is there no bigger amounts of lending? There are several reasons. The first is maybe that the year was quite conducive for the real economy and economic operator, most of which prematurely paid their previous loans. They paid back previous liabilities. So of course there was no consideration of assuming new liabilities. Maybe in view of the uncertainties, the partners in the real sector are somewhat restrained in embarking on new lending projects, but the construction companies we observe are investing broadly, and there's some lending accompanying it. The banks are not restrained in any way to implement lending. The more reasonable business projects, the more they will finance. Let me fill in. About lending to legal persons, let me quote some statistics. We mentioned it's mostly mortgages, but legal persons borrowing have 10% in drums, 21% increase in borrowing. And to shed light on this story, if we look at enterprises in 2022, the accumulation of deposits in the enterprises was growing in higher rates, and the attraction of loans from the banks was weaker. This comes to attest to the fact that there are substantial funds accumulated with the enterprises, which we hope, and our scenario discussions reflect on that. We hope that already in 23 their own funds will be steered towards their own investment projects, contributing to the increase of potential and productive capacity. Please take turns. Mr. Galstyan, you mentioned the real sector of the economy, that they've been better off this year, so to say, but if we look at the main indicators that were published today, industry-wise, we do not have the picture that you refer to. 7 or 8% of growth. I don't know whether it's sufficient or not to deem they had been better off, that's why they didn't borrow. But in the real sector of the economy, the issue of lending still exists. Could you comment on that? The comment is as follows. If there is credit-worthy business projects, as of this point, I haven't heard any signals from the banks or any sector of the economy that any credit-worthy business risk-contained project has failed to be financed. But ideologically, as of this point in time, the banks had a pretty good year in terms of returns. Annual, we have to acknowledge that this happened on the account of relations with non-residents. I do not know to what extent the industry has succeeded in establishing business relations with the non-residents. If they have formed these profound relations, the industry is such a business where we can observe cyclical effects. If they put the relations on proper tracks, we will see the effects in forthcoming years. But since the banks mostly build their businesses with the clients right here and now, they capitalized their relations with non-residents also in 22. Let me add some consideration of the sectors. Looking at the industry in the total, compared with services in the same year of 22, it may sound low. But if we look at the same industry and the breakdown, let's say food processing, the growth there is much higher. Instead, in mining, there has even been a fall. We know why. Various activities account for that. Why do I refer to food industry? Because this is the sector which rapidly succeeded to take advantage of the opportunities opening up in the Russian market. We see it both in exports and in investments, certain investment activity and projects and export as well. Please, Sputnik Armenia. With your permission, the profit that has accumulated in the banking system, you mentioned previously that the banks understanding that this is not a fundamental factor of generating its transaction income from non-residents, they built buffers to comply with the new norms. This trend persists? Yes, the trend persists. The central bank, in its prudential rulings, also contributes to this trend deepening. We in the board have discussed the anti-cyclical buffer of capital to increase one more time by 0.5%. Hopefully it will soon be published. This is in the pipeline with the Ministry of Justice as we speak. About non-resident behavior, we have November data of the loan portfolio volumes broken down by sectors. The consumer loans nevertheless increased November over November. Is this mostly on the expense of non-residents or residents? And according to your observations, these arriving individuals, do they succeed to obtain consumer loans or do they encounter difficulties? Allow me to answer your question in writing later. I do not have that breakdown, disaggregated resident, non-resident. We see legal persons, for example. The loans in foreign currency increased by 3.6%, in drum 21.6%. The total legal persons lending in fixed exchange rate increased by 10.1%. Natural persons loan in forex zero growth, in Armenian drums about 20%. As a result, natural persons lending have 19.4% growth. As a result, the total lending portfolio is 15.5% growth. The numbers indicate that the growth mostly was on the expense of residents, but a more detailed breakdown will be shared with you in writing. Thank you. Civilnet. No one is interested in monetary policy any longer? Mr. Galstyan, now I'd ask you to present last year's remittances indicators and which were the first three lines countries. The net influx was a record 2.5 billion. The first country is Russia, accounting for about 70%. USA ranks second, and third is others. Others is a group of countries, and it's Russia accounts for 71% of remittances. And let me also say that all of this information is published on our website with a full breakdown. You can have a better idea there. As of December will be posted shortly. About lending, once again, there's a group of economists who claim that in any case the refinancing rate increase has also impacted detrimentally the increase of the loan interest rate. They claim that the central bank should not so often revert to containing inflation and to some extent let the economy breathe, not increasing the core rate, allowing enterprises to get lower interest rate loans. What can you respond to this logic? And the second question, as of this year, according to estimates of the central bank, the economic growth indicator, we haven't changed it, 4.6 for the year. As for, I do not know whether that was criticism or whatever, but the central bank essentially does classical axiomatic monetary policy. If we have to revert to some orthodox monetary policy and the central bank puts the inflation aside and thinks of the economic growth of 22, not 12%, but 26%, we do not support this approach. The economy breathing is an exaggerated. In a country with double-digit economic growth, the central bank is preoccupied with demand factor caused inflationary pressures and expectations. The anchoring, it cannot push aside its principal mandate and engage in other endeavors. I think that all of our actions were reasoned, logical, appropriate. As a result, we closed the year by 8.3% inflation, which is above our target, but nevertheless is much better than in many countries of the world. And the economic growth in its turn is one of the best, ranks among the best in the world. So in our estimate, our reasoned, balanced policy, I believe, was quite appropriate. Industry growth is also expected this year, but if I understand it correctly, it's mostly in 22, mostly it was the processing industry, those associated with construction, cement production, metal structures, and other auxiliary building materials subsectors. If construction sector slows down to some extent, do you have any expectation that the construction sector may slow down this year in view of certain factors? As a result, the processing industry will follow suit. As of this point in time, we observe this sector quite naturally. The developments in the real estate market, transaction prices are an important indicator for us. Through prudential toolkits, we, in our opinion, have responded properly to those developments. As for 23, we project that the construction will continue to grow quite significantly. As a result, we will not as a result, we will have also growth in the industry 5.7%, and through the year, according to our projections, we'll have 4.6% economic growth. There are certain risks which we naturally discuss. I want to just add, since we didn't talk a lot about monetary policy, we are undergoing a stage of conceptual rethinking. We shift to the scenario of risk management from base. We discuss scenarios, not just one baseline. Today the board discussed two scenarios. One is the high inflationary scenario. We base it on high demand, accompanied by labor market tension, and this will result in pressures. As a result, our policy will be aiming at substantially containing expected high inflationary expectation. The second is a more mild scenario. The inflation goes down according to increased supply, and the demand will also go down a little. We had members of the board who also discussed the increasing scenario, but we mostly incline towards the idea that as of this point in time we should leave the core rate unchanged. In this context, we believe that to some extent the increase in construction will sustain through 23, and there will be a significant increase, 5.6% in the industry. Arca.
Merci, Arca լրատվական։ Մի հատ հարց ունեմ կրիպտոարժույթների հետ կապված։
As we know, Armenia actively joins these processes. I would like to understand, is the central bank planning something to somehow to regulate this sector? Because there is no legislative cryptocurrency regulation in Armenia. And secondly, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday Montenegro concluded an agreement with Ripple to issue national digital currency. Is Armenia considering something similar or not? Since you're for the first time attending our press conference, I'll answer your question, but we have an agreement that we discuss fiscal issues in fiscal segments. As for cryptocurrencies, there are different contradictory developments in the world. Essentially, one thing is in common with all regulators. No one at this point knows what it means to adequately regulate crypto. The central bank also discusses possible regulations of the crypto, and the country does. At this point in time, we cannot report that we boil down to a model that we believe would be best. As of this point in time, if you talk with central banks elsewhere, the main approach is that crypto is no currency. It's a speculative asset, which mostly boils down to property. As for Montenegro's decision, I'm not aware of it, but we in our working plan have an item which pertains to the central bank digital currencies. Certain actions will start doing homework over these and see what could be beneficial for Armenia in this respect. Other questions? In this potential scenarios you mentioned, you're also looking at the China factor. To what extent can it impact in your assessment the overall inflation? Because it seems as though everyone converges on this idea that this increased demand in the Chinese industry may push the commodity prices upwards. Essentially, the main goods we're interested in export-wise is copper. The prices of copper will increase, in particular due to the Chinese factor. As for food commodities development, I think looking just at the Chinese factor would be quite erroneous. We have to counterbalance it by the strengthening of monetary policies by the Fed or the ECB, which assumes less of a demand or consumption for these types of goods. Quite naturally, there are also other factors that will impact the general inflationary background. As of this point in time, what we see now, inflationary pressures from the outside on Armenia have to some extent weakened. Please. In your previous analysis, you mentioned overheating trend of the labor market. Do you expect this year this to materialize, and what would be the driver? Is it because the relocated people will spend less and will become closer in their consumption behavior to residents, or is it some may go back to Russia or live for third countries? It would be hard to project, but if you have estimates, that would be interesting. We do not have such estimates about relocated individuals' behavior. We'll see. We will monitor the developments and respectively react. As for the eventualities in the labor market, we see that there is certain tension persists, but the overheated situation has weakened. In this respect, we believe that in 23 the trends will sustain. We do not exclude the risks that the market will remain hot in 23 and our monetary, in the orbit of our monetary discussions, we will keep this as one of the factors that may impact our monetary policy direction. So you expect, to a certain extent, slowing of the growth of wages and some increase, maybe by, I can't give you unemployment expectations, hike may. In our discussions, we think there will be certain weakening. If we just look at how we characterize the tension or heating in the labor market, if we look at those indicators, in Q3 we de facto have 11% unemployment, which is unprecedented low, which is determined by this overheating. If you look at the wages in the private sector, if net of the public, we have 26-27% growth. This is the main characteristic of overheating, which of course has affected the inflationary behavior. The actions that our monetary policy implemented already in 22 and that which we are doing de facto now are mostly aiming at already in 23. We should have a certain adjustment of the unemployment, which doesn't mean just increased unemployment. This means the improper distribution of resources, on the expense of unemployment in the non-productive sector. This will be adjusted and get back to normal, and the wages in their growth rate will become comparable to our target inflation rate. This is the adjustment process which in the horizon of the forthcoming 3 years will take place, and our policy essentially is moving that way to ensure a smooth adjustment. This will be the last question. Monetary policy. Yesterday this was discussed about restriction of foreign currency mortgages. Was the objective to keep this segment of the market away from speculations, or were there other reasons? In yesterday's discussions it was also mentioned that in the pipeline there is a model swap agreement with the between the pension funds and banks, forex swaps. What stage is this at? It's at the working stage. As of this point in time, we do not have anything certain to report. That we already have some swaps between EBRD and pension funds, but the Armenian commercial banks have not. We're still working on the model agreement between Armenian commercial banks and the pension funds. As for mortgage prohibiting or ruling out dollar mortgages, the central bank is a proponent of this. This is not addressing current issues. We're looking further ahead, a lot ahead. Life has demonstrated that in the event of cyclic development of economy during crisis, mostly those of our compatriots encounter problems who have incomes in drums and liabilities in forex. The longest term liability as a rule is mortgages, which may stretch 20 years. Even those who seemingly have forex revenue streams, it's not impossible that 2 or 3 years down the road they may not have those forex revenue streams. We're inclined towards risk management. Of course, there are issues that will people with dollar income, steady dollar incomes will encounter, but we are more concerned about those our compatriots who at this point in time may be tempted by the low rate of forex mortgages and take decisions. As a result, they may regret years down the road and create significant risk for financial stability. So we, having looked at the international practices, have observed such episodes in various countries in various times, which have even led the countries towards potential financial brink of the potential financial crisis. There were countries in Eastern Europe whose residents mostly were tempted by zero interest rates, took Swiss franc mortgages, then the exchange rate of the Swiss franc significantly appreciated, and these people had to pay 20 or more percent interest as a result of appreciation, which resulted in problems not only in the financial system. The governments had to interfere, help out to save us from these problems. We believe that the residents of the Republic of Armenia should opt for Armenian drams in mortgages. About Russia, in your past analysis you mentioned that although economic slowdown was obvious in 22, but it's possible certain galvanization will take place of the economy thanks to public investments. Will that suffice for our citizens that are mostly focused in non-export sectors, as workforce in Russia keep receiving income? I don't know whether you already perused it or not. World Economic Outlook published this morning reviewed economic growth indicators for Russia. From minus 2.3, they made it 0.3 plus. IMF has reviewed 23 estimates. We expect that the construction will continue to grow in Russia in 23. As a result, we believe that those of our compatriots who are labor migrants in that sector will be employed also in 23. Thank you. Just for adjustment, maybe you already mentioned that I came a little late. The main drivers of the growth in 23: services, construction industry, services less so than this year. The first three: construction, industry, services. Thank you. We exhausted the questions. Thank you.